Welcome to the Great British Foreign Affairs Podcast, hosting insightful conversations with fascinating people to shape the way that Britain interacts with the world. In this episode, I talked to Daniela Luque about Colombia, catching up on the political developments in the country, where the peace process is up to, and a surprising discovery for me of how much we can learn from the Colombia-UK relationship. So welcome, Daniela. I'm so happy you're here with us. We are talking about Colombia, which is going to be a great opportunity, I think, for us to look at the world from a different perspective, follow some of the really interesting political developments that have been happening in Colombia, and catch up with where the peace agreement and the peace process is at. Daniela, I'd love you to just introduce yourself, first of all, to the listeners.
Hello, Anna Joy. Thank you so much for having me. I'm a Colombian lawyer. I just moved back to Colombia. I was living in London for 2 years. I was doing my master at LSE. But before this, I was chief of staff and policy director for the president of the National Infrastructure Agency. So my experience relies on transportation infrastructure and sustainability issues in these matters.
Yeah, amazing. And it's such a great opportunity for us to hear from someone that's really been at the heart of the Colombian government. You follow really closely what's happening in your country, don't you? But equally, you've also lived in London and have a sense of how things look from where we're sitting. And so I can't wait to hear your insights. But let's just start from the beginning. I wanted to ask you to introduce your country to us. Tell us a bit about the culture, the geography, the food, especially for people that don't know the country well.
Okay, so to put you in context, Colombia is located in South America, in the top corner of South America. So we can say that it's like a door to South America with shared borders with Venezuela, Panama, Ecuador, Peru, and Brazil. And this is a strategic location for trade. We're one of the main hubs in connectivity. And we're also in the equatorial line. So an interesting fact is that we don't have seasons. We have the same weather all year long. And this is also very important for agricultural products, which is one of our main sources of trade. You have probably heard about Colombian coffee. We're the third producer of coffee in the world, but we also rely a lot on coal and petrol for our exports. We're also a very biodiverse country. We're actually the most biodiverse country in the world per square meter. So to picture this, the country is full of forest. We share the Amazon, but we also have different forests, deserts, huge mountains. It's a big country. It's, I think, 5 times bigger than the UK or 3 times bigger than Germany. So it's huge. And then culturally, we're also very diverse. We have more than 100 ethnic and indigenous groups around the country. So it's very diverse.
That's an amazing description. I love that. So tell us what's going on in Colombia politically at the moment, where that sits in its history, and particularly about the peace agreement. And I'd love it if you could explain that in a way that probably takes into account that many of the podcast listeners will have followed Colombia at different times, will know about the conflict, but may not know the ins and outs, and also will be keen to get up to date on what's happening now.
Yes, definitely. So to start, we're right now in our current president is Gustavo Petro. He is the first left-wing president in history in Colombia. We've never had dictatorship in Colombia, and we've mostly governed by central or right-wing politics and political parties through history. And then this has been like a big difference in history. He is the first left-wing president, and he was also a former member of an illegal armed group, which was called the M19. So this is very important because it probably happened because of a long history of central right-wing governments, but inequalities persist in Colombia, and then a promise of peace. Although you mentioned it, we had a peace agreement a few years ago. We're still facing an internal armed conflict that has been ongoing for several years. This has been more than 60 years now. So one of the reasons that probably he was elected 2 years ago in 2022 was because of this promise of total peace for the country, and it probably made sense from the perspective of a former member of an illegal armed group. Now, to get deeper into the conflict and the peace agreement, something that probably many people have heard but doesn't follow.
Exactly.
Yes. So to explain it very like broad and basics, this started around the 60s. Before this, between the 50s and the 70s, we have something called the National Front. And this was an agreement between liberals, which was a central wing ideology, and conservatives to alternate power during 20 years. So this was not a dictatorship, but this was not real democracy. And because of that, different groups that thought differently decided to create a movement. And this was around the 60s when the FARC and the ELN groups started forming themselves because of this lack of political participation, but also because of an inequitable land distribution or great inequalities. As I explained, Colombia is a huge country, very diverse. So because of this diversity, mountains, deserts, then land distribution has always been one of the main problems that ended up in inequality, and that was like the two main causes for these groups when they were created. Left-wing political overview or views or perspectives from these groups, lack of political participation, and inequitable land distribution or inequalities within the country. Then what happened during these 60 or more than 60 years of conflict is that these groups start financing themselves with illegal mining and with narco trafficking, with drug business. And this is where during the years this problem started. So their main causes or their main political causes started to dilute, and then these intertwine with the drug and illegal businesses. So more recently, their political perspective is not that clear. They don't have a cohesive leadership within their groups, but also not a clear political ideal. It's more like just illegal business, a lot of violence and terrorist attacks within the country. So every government in history has tried to overcome this problem. And then in 2016, Juan Manuel Santos signed the peace agreement with these groups. Now, something very important to note here is that I mentioned we had two big groups, the ELN and FARC, and the peace agreement was signed with FARC. This peace agreement was aimed to tackle, of course, political participation, the problem with drugs, of course, attention to victims. We, during these over 60 years of conflict, we have had more than 8 million internally displaced people, thousands of deaths, kidnappings. So the peace agreement aimed to tackle that as well. Political participation, land distribution and inequalities, and then an entire transitional justice system for former members of these illegal armed groups. So FARC, as an illegal armed group, dissolved after the peace agreement, but then the ELN, that didn't sign the peace agreement in 2016, took over some territories left by FARC. And also during the past few years, they have been integrating more members to their lines and to their groups. So they have been gaining strength and power in the country. And although the peace agreement has been successful and is implementing, and governments have been trying to implement it, it's something that will take several years, and it's keep going. Then the main flag of this government has been to create an additional peace agreement for this ELN group that didn't sign the agreement at that time. And this is one. So just let me know if it has been clear, this overview of the Colombian conflict.
This is a fantastic description. It's so useful, really, really good, really clear, and I really feel like you've talked about the underlying issues as well as then the developments. Yeah, so you were saying, so this was a real flagship policy of this government.
Exactly. So he started government in 2022, and immediately he started dialogues with this group. The dialogues are being held in Venezuela, and it has been very difficult at the moment. The violence has increased during these years because there has been a breach of the ceasefire between these groups, and also the lack of cohesion within these groups make it so difficult to advance in the peace dialogues. Now, moving to another topic, or like a big flag of this government, is energy transition, sustainability, climate change. As I said, Colombia relies a lot on petroleum. It's our main export. So he has been trying to put in top of the agenda this energy transition with renewable projects. We actually started the tendering process for the first offshore wind farm in Colombia and first in Latin America. And because of this, we have been seeing more or greater alliances with Brazil, with Lula on deforestation topics at the Amazon. And that's kind of like the perspective of the current government right now.
Yeah, and so coming back to the conflict and the peace agreement and then the ongoing negotiations, is it fair to describe it as quite fragile at the moment, or does it feel quite solid in terms of what was agreed, but fragile because this whole other section that has not yet been resolved?
Yes, so right now is very fragile. They keep perpetrating attacks, and it's difficult to keep peace dialogues, while on the other hand, they keep incrementing their front lines, their members, and the attacks around the country. So it's very difficult to reach agreements on peace topics while they keep perpetrating violent attacks to the civil society is something really, really difficult at the moment.
And so, how do you feel as a Colombian living in an urban centre, a young professional? You've worked in the government, you're very well educated about the world, well travelled. How do you feel about your country still having this side of conflict? And when you think about your country's future, what does that feel like?
It's frustrating, somehow I feel that, Colombia it's a huge country where 52 million people, is the third most populous country in Latin America. Bogota is huge. It's a 10 million people city, and you can see economic growth. So, for example, we're one of the top 5 economies in Latin America. But on the other hand, we've always faced this conflict and violence within the country. So it's like the thing that pulls us back to progress, to tackle inequalities. And Colombia is one of the most inequalities countries, not only in Latin America, but you compare to countries in Africa like Zambia. So the inequality in Colombia, which is strictly related to the conflict, is one of the things that pull us back to progress. And it is very frustrating. Sometimes it feels like we're never gonna get over it. It has been 60 years now, and we keep talking about this, and somehow it keeps being difficult because of the many actors and causes of the conflict. So drug cartels, paramilitary groups, it's a constant violence in territories that you cannot see that in the main cities as Bogota, but it's a huge country. So in the forest, in the mountains, in rural areas, it's very, very, very sad, and the inequality disparities that you can see and face is huge, and is very sad. I think is one of the things that keeps the economy and the country back. But at the same time, I admire how, despite that, we keep going and keep growing, and so it's, I don't know, impressive and sad at the same time.
Yeah, you live with the two realities of a country really growing forward and a lot of progress being made, and at the same time quite an intractable conflict that is taking time to resolve and make progress. And for what you're describing is one step forward, 2 steps back, which often conflict resolution is.
Exactly.
And so I'm really interested to understand how the world looks from the lens of Colombia at the top of South America, and then in essence a little bit wider Latin America. Tell me how the world looks right now from Colombia, and especially as we know, you and I have talked a lot about the new geopolitical reality and how fast the world is changing.
Yes, well, so from Colombia's perspective, in Latin America, our main partners or main commercial partners have always been the nearest, or our neighbors. So Ecuador, Brazil, Peru, and Venezuela are like our main partners within Latin America. And then to complete that top 5, we've always had a strong connection with Mexico. But then if we have to pick a country that looks more similar to Colombia, it would be Venezuela. We share a lot of culture, even food, but also it's like our brother nation, to call it somehow. During the 90s and early 2000s, when the Colombian conflict was at its point, like very delicate point, many Colombians migrated to Venezuela. And then with the dictatorship in Venezuela, we have received a lot of Venezuelans in Colombia. We have more than 3 million Venezuelans in Colombia right now. So we share a lot with Venezuela. And then more recently, we have strength ties with Brazil, with Lula at the government and Petro at our government. They've been strengthening their ties, especially deforestation alliances in the Amazon, but also sustainability topics. Now he's even backing up Colombia to join the BRICS. So this is something that probably will happen this year, a formal request of Colombia to join the BRICS, which I think will be great for Colombia. And then more broadly, worldwide, our key partners have always been the US at the top, number one, then Spain. We have Switzerland and the UK at fourth place, and the Netherlands. So these have been like our main allies worldwide. With the US, I think this can be related to the reality in many countries in Latin America. They have a strong presence along the continent. They share a lot of things because of the vicinity, but also, and specifically for Colombia, they have had a strong presence to military support, armament because of the conflict, extradition treaties related to the drug problems, migration. So the face that we have from the US here in Colombia is, of course, not only a trade partner, but also this strong presence related to the drug problems, to the violence and the conflict in Colombia. And interestingly, and as I said, I worked for the infrastructure sector. They're not like a key ally. They're not developing infrastructure projects in Colombia. It's not like a big presence on that side or that area of trade or commercial relationships. But then this has been more related to European countries, and
we've missed talking about China, and I think that's an important thing. You mentioned Colombia being invited to the BRICS, which is fascinating. I didn't know about that, and that I can really see that that's an important moment for Colombia if that happens this year. Tell us as well about the relationship with China.
Yes, so something very interesting with our relationship with China is that, for example, in terms of trade, they're not our top 5 investors or partners in trade. As I mentioned, the UK is 4, the US is first, and second Spain, but then China is not even in the top 5, which is interesting, but they've been gaining increased presence, especially in infrastructure. They, for the past few years, they have been gaining this presence in transportation infrastructure projects. They have around 4 or 5 top major projects in Colombia. And now, during this government, the president obviously wants to strengthen this relationship with China for sustainable finance and climate change issues. Is something that hasn't happened yet, but he has mentioned several times that China's approach or China's market in terms of climate change and energy transition, even climate finance, is more attractive than the EU, for example. So I will say that Colombia is like in this shifting position that what comes first and offers a great deal will take it. And it doesn't matter if it's China, Russia, or the US or the UK. And I think that also the presence, like the interest from China with Colombia and with Latin America is increasing as well. I believe this is for the Belt and Road Initiative that we all know, that this China's Inc. model to enhance connectivity, not only in like a fiber optic or a transport infrastructure, but in general partnerships and connectivities. And this is like I will say a great advantage of China, and will be like a competing power to increase its presence in Colombia.
And Russia, are there many links with Russia, or?
No, not really, not really. There has always been a good relationship with Russia, never always like a very diplomatic relationship with Russia, good terms with them, but not a key trading partner, not an aid or development partner in these topics either.
Yeah. And we've talked about the UK-Colombia relationship, haven't we? And you've given me some really fascinating insights about that. Talk me through what you've seen of how Colombia views its relationship with the UK and vice versa.
With the UK, we've always had, or from my perspective and my experience, we've always had this strong connection in terms of infrastructure and sustainability. And something really interesting is that, so for us, the UK is our top 4 ally, while for the UK, Colombia is like number 74. So it's crazy, but at the same time for us, like the UK has like a strong presence in Colombia. But from my experience living in London for almost 2 years, then Colombia seemed like very far away from the UK. It's something really interesting to note. And yeah, some of the things we share a lot with the UK, or our main exports are based on agricultural goods and coal and refined oil, which are like our main trade goods. But we received a lot of medical and pharma assistance from the UK, also in technology service, communication. This is like the main service provided by the UK in Colombia. So there's like this big presence of the UK in these topics. And they've also been a great ally on the energy transition plan that the government is trying to develop right now, in sustainable infrastructure, obviously in wind projects and renewable projects. There's a great interest from the UK, support by UK export finance as well. So there's like this combination of alliances and trade relations with the UK.
Yeah, I'm absolutely fascinated by this, because when you started to tell me about this, I was surprised. And I'm a really passionate advocate about the fact that the UK needs to be building stronger relationships with countries that wouldn't rank right at the top of its diplomatic priorities, but how much diplomatic attention it's giving. This is a really interesting case study for me, because the UK almost wouldn't even need to change anything that it's actually doing in order to be seen as an important partner. But what it could do is, of course, use that and communicate that much better. And from the UK side, see the importance of that and see how much potential there is in that relationship. It feels like a relationship with huge potential, with strong ties, but that isn't necessarily being valued as that. At least I'm sure it is in the Colombian embassy. but wider and outside of the country, and particularly in London. And the other thing I find really interesting is it sounds like a real win-win, because it's on sustainability, it's on renewables, it's on connectivity, really industries and investments that you can imagine advancing and growing in the future.
Yes, exactly. So it's interesting because with such little effort from the UK, you already have like a strong presence in Colombia. We received strong support, like technical support, aid assistance, capacity building assistance from the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, with the UK Embassy in Colombia, which is actually the biggest, one of the biggest embassies in Latin America or South America from the UK. And so with such little efforts or investments, you already have a great presence and strong presence in many different topics which are key right now, on technology, on pharma, on infrastructure, sustainability, renewables, or many topics that you're leading here in Colombia. And with these, I think there's just so much space to keep exploring and opening access and increasing their relationship between Colombia and the UK. And then obviously something really interesting that you mentioned, and I saw these when I was living in London, is the strong ties that you obviously have with Europe because of the proximity, but also with Asia and Africa. Is something that, from the perspective here in Latin America or in Colombia, that looks just so far away. And then the UK could be like at this central, with this interconnectivity, like geographically connectivity with these areas of the world, which are sometimes the cases right there, can be translated as well to many experiences that we have here in Colombia. So I think there's a lot more to explore from the UK with these South America partners, Latin American partners, America. And as I was saying, it's not like a competing space with, for example, the US, that has a strong presence in Latin America, because the key topics that you both tackle are completely different. So there's a lot of space to keep progressing on this partnership with the UK and these alliances.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I wonder whether this is actually a product of the UK paying attention to Colombia because of the conflict, because of the peace agreement, and sort of investing and supporting the country as it went across that journey. And then clearly there's been some really excellent strategic thinking then about how to continue those ties. And that's really interesting what you say about the potential of a convening role, because that's something that I've been exploring in this podcast. Of course, there's huge potential for the UK to play a bigger convening role, or perhaps to come back to a convening role. It's retreated a little bit in the last sort of 5 to 10 years, particularly. But I think that's really interesting what you say, is that perhaps the UK sometimes, when it talks about a convening role, might think of the Commonwealth or some of the countries where it has the strongest ties, and yet actually if we think of Colombia as 74th country down the list, and yet seeing that as a strong tie, then and I really hear what you're saying about the different geographical locations and what that enables the UK to do, that actually as the UK thinks about this convening role, really thinking broadly and widely about its possibilities in that space and how it can use its strengths with many countries to convene around global challenges. I think it's really interesting. And I love what you're saying there about there's lots of space because countries are positioning their relationships and their partnerships in completely different ways. And therefore, actually, the UK's focus on the sectors that you've talked about is a real win-win. Yeah, I really appreciate those insights. And I know a lot of these insights, they come from the fact that you chose to come to London for a bit, didn't you? And I'd love to hear what drew you as a Colombian to study and live in the UK. But also what your insights are from that time that help us as a nation think through Britain's role in the world.
Yes, well, actually, one of the main reasons why I moved to London was because during my work, I was able to see this strong connection and partnership with the UK. So the topics that interest me the most are infrastructure and sustainability, gender equality topics, and these topics for me. A key ally was the UK embassy and the UK here in Colombia. So, with a lot of courses, technical assistance, aid, even one interesting thing is that for these type of projects, these infrastructure projects, we follow the public-private partnership model. And our regulatory system regarding these topics followed or copied somehow the PPP framework of the UK. So this is very interesting because for me it was like, okay, we have a lot of things in common. I love infrastructure. We follow this infrastructure framework in the UK. From the UK, we have a lot of things on sustainable infrastructure, things that they've been helping us. They're leading on these topics. I just want to go there. And then when I got there, I faced this very welcoming culture, very multicultural experience, which I loved. And then reflecting a bit about that experience, I saw this multiculturalism with the universities, like ambience and environment in London. It's a very diverse and multicultural city, and these university environment, it's invites London and the UK to be an innovation hub for the world. And these just open up space for research and for creativity. So I think it's one of the biggest strengths that I could point out from these experiences. And something that not only the Foreign and Commonwealth Office does very well, but also the experience from now experiencing that in London is something very, very strong. This openness to creativity, to multiculturalism, provoked by this international top education system and universities. And then I'll also highlight the infrastructure and technology and communication support. I think this is also like a main asset or strength from the UK. So in terms of trade, for example, the main service that the UK export to Colombia is in the technology and communication services, which is a top priority nowadays. But then also related to infrastructure, as I was saying, with these PPP framework. I think this is like an open space and or a window of opportunity to explore more on these topics. The UK it has been sharing or supporting a lot of sustainable transport through Crossrail International, for example, to set the policy framework for more sustainable transportation projects in Colombia. So there's a lot of space and there's a lot of experience and knowledge from the UK on these areas. And then I will also highlight the climate change and energy transition agenda, which is a common alignment between both countries and a top priority right now worldwide. But the UK is a big leader, a major leader on these topics. So the UK has the biggest offshore wind farm in the world and is one of the top 5 renewable or energy powers in the world. So leveraging this capacity knowledge is key for the UK right now, as I said, and it's also a top priority worldwide and an alignment between both countries. And then what we were talking about, I will say that an additional major advantage of the UK is this interconnectivity, this London being an international hub, not only for financial transactions, which is obviously the central capital, but also geographically is well situated where there's a lot of space to create more opportunities and partnerships worldwide, to position London and the UK as a major ally with non-traditional partners.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, you're very kind to reflect on those things because I know that it's not a completely positive picture, but the fact that you're pulling out these things which I think are sometimes taken for granted, I think it's very helpful as Britain collects itself together actually after a difficult time for the country and looks forward. It's really interesting. Some of the things you're saying are just givens: the interconnectivity, the geographical location, the multiculturalism of particularly London, but right across the country in other areas too. I think it's fascinating that when you look at it, you see that as foundations that Britain can leverage, and then going on into the universities, education, and then leading sectors. And I think my reflection as I hear about these things is firstly, there are things to be proud of and to build on for Britain, but also these sectors that you're talking about are also moving quickly, aren't they? Technology and communication, renewables and energy. And so actually, as you said, leveraging, taking advantage and really jumping on those opportunities. And the fact that we are well positioned in them right now in 2024 is really important, really useful, and is an opportunity on a plate. The country has to really keep its eye on the game in that case, not just for the UK's progress, but in terms of its partnerships with other countries. We should really elevate it in how we are thinking about our foreign policy. And finally, I mean, you've had some fascinating experiences in your position within the Colombian government. You're a woman in infrastructure. There aren't that many leading women in infrastructure. And I was really interested to hear your insights from that time around the importance of infrastructure. I know you've talked to me about, and the impact of that on a country, but also what you learn and what you particularly have taken away from that.
Yes, well, love that question, because that's one of the topics that I love the most. As you said, very few women in infrastructure, and for Colombia, most of these jobs are actually over 96% of these type of jobs are um, um, done by men. So there's like a huge gender inequality gap in this, and my passion for infrastructure, and specifically transportation infrastructure in Colombia, comes specifically because of what I was trying to explain on how Colombia works. So a huge country, very diverse, a lot of different ecosystems and territories, but great inequality. So uh, to understand transportation infrastructure here, you have to position yourself in this landscape, in this context, and understanding that sometimes in these countries, in Colombia, in many countries in Latin America, transportation infrastructure is like the open door, or the main first presence of the government, of the state, in these very remote and rural areas of the country, especially a country that has faced violence for so many years. Is the way that the state gained presence in these territories. And then transportation infrastructure is it gives like a boost to socioeconomic development, and it's for many people and in many regions is the only opportunity to have a fair job and economic development in these areas. So this is something very beautiful that this like transportation infrastructure projects does in Colombia and countries like Colombia. And then also, like, something that makes me very uncomfortable is seeing that most of these jobs go through to men, and then if it's the only opportunity for people in these territories to have a job opportunity, then it should be more equitable to close those gaps. So some of the policies I have led are related to sustainability, but not only environmental sustainability, but also social sustainability. So trying to picture these, if it's the main or the first presence of the state in these territories, then people tend to think like, okay, then what happens with the school that we need, or what happened with these football field that we need, or the hospital. And then many infrastructure projects in Colombia start facing these challenges of trying to face these necessities or requests from the communities, and these created a lot of problems some years ago. And then what we made, and the policy I led, was to include these, and to while understanding this perspective of what these type of projects mean in Latin America and in Colombia, then you have to engage the community to construct these bottom-up solutions with the community, to not only de-risk the projects, but to give more presence of the state in these regions, than to include a football field, or to include a basic school infrastructure within these transportation projects. Sounds, for some, may seem look crazy, but for these people, it's just their only opportunity, and also it's a very little investment if you compare it to these major massive infrastructure projects, when the railway projects or highway projects, which these type of social investments are very, very little compared to the overall investments for the construction of the project. So that's one of the things I love the most. And during all this process, my major ally was again the UK, with courses on sustainable infrastructure, with gender equality and social inclusion, but also with aid and technical support to create these policies and these frameworks on sustainable infrastructure.
I absolutely love that. And it also it brings us full circle in a way, doesn't it? Because as a country builds forward from a peace agreement, that citizen state trust and that ability to provide services in remote areas and be a visible government that serves its people is very important to strengthen the foundations for peace and stability moving forwards. And you said as well about quotas of jobs for women. Tell me a bit more about that.
Yes, so I had this idea of include quotas for women in these type of projects, in PPP projects. So mandatory quotas for women, so that if this is the only source of job or economic development in some regions, then it should be more equitable for men and women, especially in these territories where like masculinity is exacerbated. So it's a great opportunity that can bring and help close those gender gaps in the country. And then, so what I proposed and what was included with this policy was to create 30% of quotas for women in these type of projects that will be distributed not only in directive job opportunities, but also in constructive works. So if these women feel like they want to literally construct the road, then they should be able to do that. And as it was not going to happen alone, then my proposal was okay, let's create these quotas so that they can engage with these type of projects and they can have economic freedom to raise their families, to raise their own. So that was one of the initiatives that I had. Surprisingly, it was not easy. I actually faced opposition even from some women, but I guess that you have to understand that you cannot talk about these topics sitting in the main capital, but trying to understand the concerns and the needs of these women in isolated territories of the country, where they're able to do whatever and take whatever opportunity to raise their family and have these economic opportunities and freedom in a fair way. So yeah, that's one of the compromises that one should make as a civil servant, but also in these areas or these sectors where gender disparities are bigger than in any other areas and sectors.
Yeah, it's such an incredible achievement. I think your story is so inspiring, and there's a lot more to come, I'm sure. But just, I think you're such an inspiring example of having seized the opportunity within a position that you held within government to bring into force policies that genuinely change lives, and to think about them slightly differently so that more people have those opportunities than would have done if that hadn't been brought in. And that is a brilliant note to end on. I want to say thank you so much, Daniela. I wondered if people are interested in connecting with you. How is it best for them to do that?
Yes, definitely LinkedIn, Daniela Luque M. So DANIELALUQUEM. It's my LinkedIn, and happy to connect with powerful women and also brilliant minds from all around the world. So thank you so much for having me. This has been very interesting conversation. It's always very interesting to talk to you. And yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Daniela. Take care. Thank you for listening to the Great British Foreign Affairs podcast, where Britain meets the world. Subscribe today, share it with a friend or colleague, and be part of shaping Britain's role on the global stage.